So I told him that he needed to help his partners with doing a certain thing, and so he needed to ask them questions to figure out what they didn't understand so that he could help them. And he laughed, and I said, I'm serious. You need to only ask them questions and see what they do. And he got so busy. It was like he was so important then. And the girls were just really fascinated because it was a boy after all, and they were in middle school. And it really worked really well. That group began working really diligently in their project.
So then we transferred it to mixed because we had this problem with one expert for two people. And that ended up working well because the expert learned how to ask better questions in their own classrooms as well as to their partner. And the non-expert developed a conceptual understanding through the questioning of their expert partner.
And it works wonderfully with grown-ups as well as kids. So, okay, this next one is big circle, little circle, and I need a voluntold, Lori.
Come up there.
Yes, please. Okay. Okay, Lori is obviously taller than me, isn't she? Okay. She might weigh a little bit more than me. No. She might be stronger than me, right? She might be smarter than me, right? Okay. So Lori, I know some things you don't know.
What things do you know that? What makes you think you know things that I do?
Well, I just have been other places, and so I think I know some things you don't know.
So what are some things you think you know that I don't know?
Well, I know that I can see behind you. You can't see.
That's true. What else do you know that I don't know?
I know that you have really nice eyes.
I do know that. I've heard that before.
Okay, all right. Okay, so stop. Let's look at this. It is
Okay.
awkward. It's a little bit awkward. However, in our conversation, we ended up with, we started out when she said, what makes you think you know something I don't know, okay? Here's Lori, here's me, right? So when she kind of is a little bit authoritarian with me, you know, and when she says that response, then what if it makes me feel like I have a smaller circle? And it starts to make me feel a little intimidated and a little bit defensive. And so I need to make my circle equal to hers. So the dotted line means I fill my circle up with resentment. And so how does that affect the communication that we have? How does that affect our relationship? So now let's replay. Okay, let's do this, and let's see if we can make our circles the same size. All right, you start the conversation.
With the same topic.
Doesn't matter, whatever. You just. You can do this. You can do this.
I've learned a lot from you since I started with that walk on the kids about that.
Well, thank you. What things have you learned from it?
I've learned how to better work with my math and science teachers. You have always been there to help answer questions. How else do you think you can help me?
Well, that's what we're here today for. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to work with you. Thank you. Okay, I am too. Okay. Okay, I'm still getting more information. She's still getting more information. I have the way to take advantage of what she knows. She has the way to take advantage of what I know. The equal circle thing, it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter if you're 2, or if you're 22, or if you're 62. The equal circle makes a big difference, okay? That's a group norm. As you're communicating with colleagues, teachers, parents, kids, equal circles are big deals. Here we go, Ross and Mark. Thank you very much. just give Lori a round of applause. How many of you know that getting up in front of the group, especially voluntold, is a little bit intimidating? Right, especially among your peers, right? So, part of our responsibility is to maintain that person's integrity and sense of self, their confidence at all costs. If I'm the speaker and I'm the presenter or whatever, if I'm the principal, if I'm the director of curriculum, and I have someone in a public space particularly, then I must maintain their dignity and their confidence above it all else. Because the one time I don't do that, I destroy the relationship and I'm done. I'm done being able to affect them because it goes back to, it goes back to that. And then you have, then it's a problem, right? And you just do not want to, you don't want to damage the relationship. Now, are we gonna make mistakes? Absolutely. And so if we make mistakes, what do we do? Fix it. Okay, I'm gonna share just a little anecdote. I had my grandbabies this weekend, a 15-month-old and one that will be 3 next month, so the 2-year-old. So the 2-year-old runs to me and says, "Freddie, I have to go potty. I need help." Okay, I go in there. The commode is completely filled with a brand new box, the big, economy size box of puffs. Totally. So I looked at her and I said, "Did you put these in there?" "Yes." I said, "Well, then we have a problem." She's like, "Well, I didn't do it." I said, "Yes, you did. You just told me you did. Now we have a problem. What are we going to do?" She's like, "I don't know." And she said, "Flush." And I said, "We can't flush because it will ruin the commode and it'll make a bigger mess and then you'll have a bigger mess to clean." And she said, "So, what do we do, Randy?" And I said, "Well, what has to come out?" And she looked at me like, "You're not serious." And I said, "They have to come out. I'll hold the trash bag." So she put her little hands in and kept pulling out puffs until she got all of it out of there. And then she flushed the commode and then we were washing her hands. And as she's washing her hands, she looks up at me and she's like, "Are you mad at me, Randy?" And I said, "No, you just made a mistake and you fixed it." And that was the end of it. Okay? I could have just lost it. And as a young mother, I probably would have, but, so think about that. It doesn't matter how old they are. We have to maintain their sense of self. Okay. Going back to the question. Good. Did you catch that or do you want me to repeat it? Okay, watch again. Okay, can you all see it? Okay, I need you to be present. I know we have electronics. I know we have important things. This is your time. This is the time we're building you, and this is our gift to you. This is our way to support you, plus you, give you a chance to breathe and to think and to dream and to plan and do all those kinds of things. So please be cognizant of that. Be present. If there's an emergency, by all means, step out, do that. Please refrain from checking your emails till breaks, all those kinds of things. Use this opportunity for you because that's what it's designed for. Okay? Okay. What is STEM, Dr. West?
Well, still has to be connected first. So if y'all want to take a stand-up stretch, or even a technology break.
Mark Estrada, he is the.
Assistant Superintendent for CNI.
Okay, Assistant Superintendent for CNI in Lockhart. This is Faith Pope, she is the Director of Elementary Education, and this is Ross Baker, who is Director of Secondary. And how long have you been on the job, Ross?
12 days.
Okay, and,
Wonderful days.
yes, and this is Luciano Castro, and he is the high school principal at Lockhart. And then we have Sally Foster and teacher and Dean. Seems like they're okay. Lori Davis is from Lockhart. We have Suzanne Scoggins from Lockhart, Jamie Griebel from Lockhart, Patricia Rocha. Yes. Deanna Juarez,
Annalisa Holmes.
and you're from Lockhart. Lockhart. Yes. So, we have a lot of representatives from Lockhart. They're gonna do some, new things. We're gonna put a block class at Lockhart. We're gonna put, some student teachers at Lockhart. And trying to train all principals so that we have good placements and we're gonna see if we can ramp up the college of business here. So, okay. Tell me about what you gleaned from the first exercises that we were just talking about. Think about your campus right now and think about what norms do you have going at your campus that are either unwritten, written. A lot of times they're unwritten because social and emotional learning is taught rather than taught. So the modeling of how you do what you do makes a huge difference. And the more kids get to see grown-ups collaborating and speaking to each other collegially and civilly. It's like even though Lori and I were playing, she was very respectful and very civil, and that's a big deal. Okay, ready?
One of the things that Denise says she likes to watch with Sandy and me and our training, because we take part, we're not just observers in the training. If I don't understand something about math, I'm raising my hand and I'm asking it. And apparently sometimes she and I don't agree. So we have these discussions in front of the teachers, and it seems normal to us, but apparently it's not normal. And Denise has commented on that. She thought it was good for the teachers to see us having civil discourse and not necessarily agreeing on things. All right, so what we want to do now is we want to talk a little bit about STEM. And the reason is because there's a lot of controversy around it. People don't understand it. And so what I wanted to do is to kind of talk to you a little bit about what I call STEM models. So, all right, all right, so, in the new standards for the nation, we actually have two new standards, and I'll talk to you more about later on. But there is the framework for K-12 science education, which came out in 2011, and then the 2013, the next generation science standards, which is based on the framework. So in both of those new standards, there's no longer the term processes, science processes like we have in the TEKS, because they have actually broadened the definition of it. And so now you're going to be hearing the term scientific practices. And one of the problems that we have is with all of us, I had it initially about what's the difference between science and engineering. And so the standards pretty clearly define it. They define it as, in science, we ask questions and we construct explanations based on our investigations. Pretty simple. Whereas in engineering, engineering defines a problem and designs a solution. Okay, so that's I guess the new norm, if you would. Now, how do we get engineering into science? So that's kind of a discussion we're going to have for a few minutes here. There are different ways to think about STEM. One way is the silo, so science is separate from math, is separate from engineering, is separate from technology. That's probably the more common one even now, even though people want to try to move it to something different, it's still pretty typical that it's taught that way. And in fact, what ends up happening is the teachers, these teachers are not even talking to each other, which is part of, what we're trying to address in our training. So there's the silo model. There is the model where science and math get together. And actually, this is what we try to do with Mix, is we try to put science and math together in a way that will enhance both science and math understanding by students. When we first started this about probably 10 years or so, we started thinking about STEM and how can we enable people to understand it, and what is really going to be a model that's going to work. People get lots of ideas, especially the university people. They're coming up with all these things that are really not practical, right? So the idea is what's really going to work, and so we thought about all four things, and we actually started involving a lot of technology in our early training, but we decided not to because it takes a long time to teach technology to teachers. And so when we are teaching technology, we are not teaching the science and the math. Luciana, you just standing up because you're comfortable? Good for you. Okay. All right, so actually what we try to do in Mix is we integrate, or actually, let me go back here. We use what's called we call a correlated model because it's team taught. So Browning's going to teach the math, somebody else is going to teach the science, and we focused on chemistry, we focused on physics, we focused on, we haven't done life science because more teachers know life science than they do the other one, so we tried to focus on the one that the teachers did not know that much about. And we've been focusing on earth science because that tends to be statewide one of the lowest performing areas. But we don't just focus on one discipline. For example, this summer, we're going to start actually with a physics-chemistry strand. It's called the particle nature of matter because the TEKS do not address it well. And what the high school people are telling us is that students do not understand these concepts because the foundation is not laid. So at least the first 3 days, we're going to focus on this particle nature of matter, and then we're going to move into how that plays out in physics and chemistry and earth science with convection currents and things of that nature. So, but they're taught with experts. So we have a petroleum geologist who's now an 8th grade science teacher in Round Rock, whom I discovered when she was a cooperating teacher, one of my student teachers, and I quickly hired her and said, come work with us, and she's fabulous. So there is, that earth science focus in a lot of what we're going to do this year, but it's not going to be the same as what we did earlier with that earth science focus. Do we have technology? Yes. For example, we buy the teachers iPads, and we also bought them smart scopes. But again, just a smart scope training took about 3 or 4 hours. And that's time that we're not learning content. Technology is just a tool. And it's not going to work any better if teachers don't have the fundamental understanding of the content and the pedagogy to select the appropriate tool. I don't care what kind of instructional strategy you're talking about. And technology is not a silver bullet. There's no research that says they're going to learn any better. In fact, there is research, and if you have them start with the technology early, they do not learn, they do not understand things conceptually. We'll come back to that a little bit later. So, do we have technology in Mix? Yes, we do. We also have some engineering that you'll see a little bit later on. In fact, the session, 2 sessions ago, 2 Saturday sessions ago, we went into an area that's called eco-hydrology. One of our biologists here in the department. We took the teachers out to Freeman Ranch, which is property, outside of San Marcos here. And the idea was to measure the amount of water loss through evaporation with different kinds of vegetation and how you could measure that. So they came back in and they started building these detection devices. Well, that's engineering. Okay, so we have, it's not that we don't do any of that, it's just not our main focus. If it's appropriate to come in with the content area, then we will include that. Now, as I said, Mix It Up is a kind of an integrated model where we have experts teaching it. So Brown is the math, and then whatever science we're focusing on will be taught there. Now, what do we mean by integrated science? So we think there's a difference between correlated and integrated. We teach correlated because it's a team teaching by two experts with at least a master's degree in that content area. So what we want teachers to do, we think will be helpful to their students, is to integrate math. Now, what do we mean by integrate? This is our definition. We think that if math teachers will do these things, use science content or natural world phenomena when they're teaching math. If they'll use science equipment. I went into Lori's class one time and she had this fabulous percentage lesson using glassware. And she asked if 50% was going to be enough for the juice that she brought for the students to take. And they said, oh yeah, 50%, we'll be happy with 50%. But she put this poor teacher, story out there, couldn't afford it anymore. And so they said, yeah, they'd be happy. Well, she brought in all this scientific glassware, and she gave them 50% of a 50 mil container, and then she brought this 1,000 mil container, and pretty soon the kids said, wait a minute, that's not fair. And she said, well, you said 50% was okay. You'd be happy with that. And so it was quite compelling to use that kind of concrete example that she was using science equipment to teach a math, and she's a master at that. Analyzing science data. So why can't the data be gathered in the science classroom and be analyzed in the math classroom? They're going to make those connections because you know what kids think. What goes on in the science classroom stays in the science classroom. They don't see any connection with the real world, with math, with social studies, with ELA. They don't see any of those kind of connections. Reference relevant science data in the classroom or field experience. So it could be as simple as students, you remember last week when you went out with so-and-so's class, or you had this particular lab in that class and you did such and such. So it might just be a couple of sentences that references that science experience. We call that integrating because we're having those kids make the connection. And then having to use a proper academic vocabulary. Science is probably worse about that than math is, but each discipline has their own academic vocabulary. And it needs to be used properly and not sloppily because it ends up confusing students. For science teachers, yes.
Can you give an example of the vocabulary, how it uses students?
Let me get to science, and I've got the classic one that I'm sure you know about, that you probably could give it for us. But anyway, for a science teacher, we're already using math and science. We're measuring things and doing a whole range of mathematical operations, if you would. Using math manipulatives when it's important. We were in one classroom and the teacher was looking at the not the food pyramid, the energy pyramid, and she was using base 10 blocks. The science teacher, the seventh grade science teacher, will use the base 10 blocks when teaching the energy pyramid. Using math in the same manner that is taught in the math classes and not understanding conceptual understanding by math tricks. We are awful at that. Science teachers are awful about tricks because we're not caring about the math. Math is just a tool for us. We want to get to the science and we want to understand the science. Well, we're going to kind of whiz through the math by teaching math tricks with triangles and I don't know what all kind of math tricks. Cross multiplying, all those kind of stuff, which actually undermines students' conceptual understanding of math. So if I'm not talking to the math teacher when I'm developing my instruction, I am not going to be using the proper language, and I'm going to be using some sloppy language and maybe even some incorrect language. And then using the proper math academic vocabulary, there is a lot of that. For example, we will say reduce a fraction in science, and the math teachers fall over in apoplexy because the amount is not reduced.
It just is simplified.
So we need to use the term simplified, not reduce the fraction. So see, it's not that hard, but just think about it from a student we confuse students by not paying attention to these fairly simple details. Mark, did that do it for you? Yeah. And it probably happens more with the math vocabulary than it does with the science vocabulary, it appears.
For ELLs, it's particularly difficult to translate these different terms between math and science. So the Slavic language and the confusing language,
But it's just good practice
it is
for everybody.
much best.
I mean, you look at what we're supposed to be doing for our ELLs, it's not any different than what we should be doing for our native English speakers like me. Okay, all right, then you have what we call this model where you have science, technology, and math. And actually, that's what happened with good science courses. Good science courses already have, obviously, the science, but they also have the technology. We always use equipment. We've done that for, 100 years, so that is not different. So the technology is already there. You may not call microscopic technology, but it is. So we already have the technology in there, if they're using best practices. We already have the math that we already spoke about, because we need the measurement, in kindergarten, for example. And then the PBL, so it's kind of interesting being old and having that institutional knowledge, because I see fads that come and go and cycle through. I've done PBLs for decades. And so now they're the big fashion, this is a big thing to do. Well, actually, good teachers used to do that and until they were told not to do that for some odd reason. But any kind of long-term investigation, one of the ones that I do with my course is called Landscape for Learning. And they take measurements, monthly measurements. Well, it's not a lot of data. You probably remember that, Sally. They take monthly measurements that takes them maybe 10 minutes. And they do it all through the semester with mine, but they do it all through the year. And they start with, the very beginning when school starts. And so they're taking measurements about where the pattern of the shadows. I ask them to choose either something that's full sun or shade in the morning, and of course different in the afternoon. Because ultimately they're going to see the pattern for seasons. They're going to see the patterns of the change of light during the day. They're going to see all kinds of patterns. They're also taking soil measurements and all kinds of physical parameters, because at the end, what I want them to do is to start planting their schoolyard with native plants, mostly, so they can go outside and do a lot of outside science with it, but only in small patches. So it might be just a 12 by 12 this year, and the next year a 12 by 12. So that's a PBL, and it's fairly simple to do. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it can teach a lot of the teach. So there's a lot of different PBLs that you can do. A PBL could be 2 days. It doesn't have to be 2 semesters. And then the garden, I know Suzanne has a lot of flowers planted in front of her school that is usually beautiful when we go over there. But, having any kind of school garden or school area that students are maintaining, you learn a lot just by being outside. You learn a lot of science and math that's outside. Lord?
My finals for my geometry, my algebra 1 were PBLs,
Yes.
but it was a math PBL.
Yeah, she'll share those with you tomorrow, and it's Gloria's very creative. But the PBLs and math are not just for science, but also for math, but you have to have that creativity. And of course, you can get all of these kind of connections among these 4 areas with clubs, with gardens, as we said. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it. There's no engineering in the science teach. So if we're asking science teachers to do engineering, we're saying, okay, on top of everything else that you're supposed to teach, we want you to do engineering. So we need to think about that, what's important for kids to learn, and when they're going to incorporate the engineering component in, because it is not in the science teach. These are a couple of the standards that I was telling you about. This is a framework for K-12 science education. This is online. We buy both the paper copies and the online copies for the teachers. This is the next generation science standards. One of the differences between these two is this one has a lot of narrative. It explains a lot of things. It talks about grade band endpoints. By the end of this grade level, students should have learned thus and thus and thus concepts. The next generation science standards are at the end. So how do you assess what they should have learned by the end of grade 5? And I will show you an example of that with our grade 2 lesson plan that we're going to start with on Monday with our teachers. So these are two of the standards. They are, as I said, online, and we give paper copies to the teachers. I find them useful for both because I take a lot of notes, write down tips and so on in the paper copies, which you can annotate on an electronic copy, but I kind of flip back and forth. I can't figure out which one I like best. As principals, you will either have received this or you will receive it. This is the national standards for planning school science facilities. I am a co-author. I don't make any money off of these books, but there's a lot of really nice ideas about it and the importance of flexibility and so on that we're seeing not only in science but a lot of the other disciplines now. So if you're thinking about STEM, you need to think about space. Science takes space, math is now taking space, and STEM takes even more space, if you would. So here's something that you need to think about. We have to have sufficient space. These are staged pictures. This particular one is staged, and this one has 43 square feet per student. And what you will notice is you can't see what kids are doing because they're crowded there. You also notice that they lack adequate elbow space. In my classroom, when I was teaching 6th grade, for those of you who don't know me, I taught 16 years in high school, 2 years in middle school, 8 years in Montessori school, and I'm still teaching science classes here, but it's not as much fun because adults are not as much fun as kids are. But when I was teaching 6th grade science, we were using a curriculum called Voyage of the Mimi, and the kids were seated, they were on task, there was no discipline problems, and one of the kids had, has a point compass, right? Okay. One of the kids was, had a compass, and the next kid bumped his elbow, and it went right into the lower eyelid. You have to have adequate space when you're dealing with equipment and science, particularly in science, adequate space for equipment and materials and chemistry. So a friend of mine staged it. It's actually from Georgetown. Now, here is the same one. Oh, look, this is not a good design, so don't pay any attention. Don't copy that design for your labs. In this case, there's 58 square feet per student, so you can see what kids are doing, and they have that adequate elbow space. So space is critical when you're thinking about science and safety. And if you're thinking about STEM or the engineering components, you have a space issue also that's very similar in terms of safety with engineering. Now, this is my research. This is kind of interesting. So when we talk about class size, what does the research say about class size? All over her, class size doesn't matter, right? What does the research actually say about class size? What does it say about reading? Why do we have reading class size limits? Because the research says it matters in reading in K3. And actually, so it says that it matters in K3, and I may be a grade level off, but after that, it didn't seem to matter. So somebody, in their lack of wisdom, had generalized this to all disciplines and K-12, and the research is only in K-3 in reading. So class size does matter in other areas. We know it matters in safety because I have the research to show that it does matter. Now look at this little bump here. Look at there, what's blue? Middle school. So when you get beyond 24, you get a bump in accidents. When you get, 21 to 24, when you get a bump increase beyond 24, you get a big increase in accidents. This is a supervision issue, though. This is not an elbow space issue. So it's a matter of being able to supervise that many students doing science with chemicals and equipment and so on. So that's a supervision issue. The next one is what is, sorry, going the wrong way here, I'm an Aggie. And then this one though is that elbow space issue that I was talking about earlier. Notice that it's statistically significant at the 0.001, highly significant, that when you have an increase or a decrease in elbow space, you're gonna get a big jump in accidents. And what you will notice, if we go back to the picture, anybody know what that 58 square feet means? Lockhart, you should know this. You just built high school.
I just typed it in, so 1,200 square feet.
What it means is you are required by rule to have 58 square feet per student in a high school science room, in a combo room. If you're gonna, that's for 24, if you're gonna build 28 lab stations in there, you have to have an additional 58 square feet per student by rule. And TEA can and has come into districts and said, you're built for 28, you may not put any more in any one class. Rule also says that, than 28. That's only for schools that are under that year rule, I guess you would say, which is 2004. You're also about to end with your renovation of your labs. Your labs are pretty big though. I don't remember the capacity of what the maximum capacity is, so that would be something that you might want to think about. So again, if you're talking about bringing engineering in, you've got issues of storing projects, having additional equipment, having additional rooms that may have power tools, et cetera, in there. So there's a lot to consider when you're talking about moving into a full STEM program, whether it's going to be taught separately or you're going to try to integrate it all together. So you want to think about what kind of room arrangement. So are you going to have them, here they're called houses, but a different room, so a different name. So you're going to have, one house or one group of students that all of the core teachers are going to be together. Or this, in particular case, science would be the center of it, and you would have these houses or core groups around them, grouped around them. Now, there are books out. This is one that NSTA has. It's called STEM Integration in K-12 Education. You can order nsta.org if you want to look at it, or you want your teachers to look at it, which is what I would recommend. And then, as we were saying, if you want to add engineering, this is just all variations on a theme. So you have all these different ways to bring in engineering or integrate one or more of these 4 areas. We've seen it done as separate courses. We've seen it done in schools with 2 courses combined. I remember Maynard years ago had chemistry and algebra 1 teachers co-teaching it together. So there's just a lot of ways that you can do this. 2 or more, you can have them all together as STEM. I think that's kind of complex. I would never start with that. I might have that as a goal, but I don't think I would ever start with that, because there's a lot of logistics that I want to kind of alert you to with this. You can have classroom activities that involve engineering, and that's where that NGSS, if we look at that, when we look at that tomorrow, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's not that difficult to bring in the engineering as part of the summative assessment that you might have for students. Similar to what Lori was talking about with her final exam. And of course, club activities, some of you already have Legos and those kind of clubs, and that's engineering. Actually, just playing and building stuff is engineering, like kids used to do when they weren't looking at screens all the time. We already talked a little bit about PBLs, which can be either one discipline doing a PBL or a combination. When we were working at the middle school at STEM Academy, they had a grant, and the grant required, was it 3 PBLs a year? So all 4 of the disciplines, science, math, engineering, technology, had to get together and come up with ideas for a PBL PPL, the state required that, and tomorrow Lori will explain a couple of those for you. So, there's a lot of ways that you can do this. There's teacher-led, if you would, STEM that combines a lot of this. There's a teacher in San Antonio that has an olive orchard. I don't know if you've seen that. It's a big project at the school, and it's been going on for quite a few years now. And, farming is pretty integrated. There's engineering that has to happen when you're farming with watering systems, and think about it. There's a historical village, so a social studies kind of PPL that also is in San Antonio. It's very interesting with buildings and everything. School gardens that we mentioned a little bit earlier. Certainly robotics is just engineering. There's not the STEM, but it's the engineering component of it generally. But you have to know the characteristics of materials before you can start engineering stuff, no matter what age you are. Well, we have STEAM now, which is a good thing. My daughter-in-law actually is an art major. We talk a lot about art and engineering, and I'm always, even when I was in the classroom, I worked with an art teacher a lot. I would loan specimens to her, and we'd have conversations, and she would, we would try to have some kind of collaborative project sometime during the year that also involved art, and that was before it became fashionable.
I have a doctoral student who is doing her dissertation on if students enrolled in art classes has an influence on what math classes they take when they graduate and go to college. So her data is not analyzed yet, but it's a very interesting dissertation. She was an art teacher. She's now a principal.
Yeah, and most of us know the connection between math and music. Some of my best students in high school were in all city orchestra, etc. So there's that way of thinking that builds whenever you're involved with these other areas. And then here's something that you might think about is involving CTE. So this is art, computer science area, the math classrooms, science classrooms, kind of a studio that is an all-purpose room that you might think about, but I'm not sure, you've got tools, power tools areas that you have to have storage for projects. I mean, there's a lot of things that you have to think about than just jumping into it, but CTE is a natural connection to us. One of the last things I want to talk to you about is some research that STAT did on what we call lost or stolen instructional time. STAT did this, it was a statewide survey with K-12 teachers, and they reported 23 days during the school year of lost or stolen instructional time. The interesting thing is that only 13 days was lost to testing. 10 days was lost to all of these kinds of things. I was in an elementary school, not one of yours, one of my student teachers, and the cooperating teacher said, well, we can't have science today. The principal's called for a pep rally. It's 5th grade. I said, a pep rally? For what? Well, it's to build spirit for the high school. I said, you don't even have teams. Anyway, it was just, I was just flabbergasted that instructional time would be stolen from an academic area for a pep rally. For nothing, in my mind. But you'll notice there's a lot of things that we do in schools, some of which we don't have to do, like removing students from classes and that is disruptive, or allowing parents to come in and bring cupcakes, which we saw last year, that completely ruined the last 15 minutes of the last period of the day. I mean, there's all kinds of things that do not have to happen. Some of the things have to happen. Some of them are by rule or by law. We know that. But to think about how many days are lost or stolen from the academics. So, STEM, a lot of ways to think about it. My last recommendation is it needs to be a collaborative decision. It should not be top down. It should be everybody from the top to the bottom making the decision about it, because they're pretty much gonna be dependent on the quality of whoever's leading that particular, effort, which is usually the classroom teacher. So, questions? Got a steal? Okay. All right, so now it's time for what we call a walk and talk. So we have a circular hallway. You are not allowed to stay seated. You must get up and you must walk around the hallway and come back to, actually back.
And restrooms are down the hall, past the elevator, and on the right.
I'm gonna start like that when I lose my extra thing.
We're gonna do
So it's not like I start like that when I lose my extra thing.
Okay.
I'm thinking almost 50.
They actually,
Principals meeting.
Yes.
they're real stiff.
Very good.
This is what we need for principals.
They're
too short.
Do they raise?
And also, I noticed you didn't have a name.